What I'm hoping we can cover, yep, I see we're recording, which is great. What I'm hoping to cover over the next hour or so through our discussion, I'm hoping we can basically walk away with three main takeaways. The first one is around this concept of the lakehouse. Databricks delivers, we're the data and AI company, and we deliver a platform which delivers on this lakehouse vision. I'd love to walk you through what that is, what the problem is for enterprises, and how we help to solve it. The second thing we're going to work through is understanding how successful leaders within data teams actually understand and then quantify the value of what they're doing. And then finally, we're going to talk through the importance of actually telling a really compelling story around the value that data can deliver to an organization. And I'll give you a few examples of what that actually looks like. Now, I chatted with Jungwook before we got started. I know from experience, having sat on many a Zoom over the last year during COVID, these are always so much more fun if we keep it interactive. So I'll be sure to stop at various points and make sure that if you have any questions, there's an opportunity for you to jump in, or if you want to use the chat throughout, I'd love to kind of see a bit of two-way conversation around these concepts. If there's anything that's, I'm going too fast, too slow, anything you'd like to double click on, I'd love to hear it and drive the discussion that way. So in terms of our agenda, I'll start with just a little bit on me so you get to know a little of my background. We'll talk about the problem that Databricks solves and how Lakehouse comes into the picture there. We'll understand why data teams should actually think about value in the first place. Talk about how Databricks delivers on it. Jungwook talked about Spark, which is a really important component, but there's a whole myriad of elements that really kind of work in concert to come together at Databricks and deliver value to our customers. And then finally, we'll talk through what this actually means in the wild. I find it's often more helpful to actually show you some real examples and talk through how we develop a value story there and what that actually means for customers. So why don't we dive right in? So I thought it might be helpful just to start with my background. And as an MBA class, I'm sure you're familiar with the management consulting industry and the kind of work that we do. This is where I started my career. Out of university in Brisbane, Australia, I ended up moving to the big smoke down to Sydney and started working as a consultant. And I find it's always helpful in explaining what a management consultant is. It's helpful to think through the different personas that were in my life at the time and working out what they actually thought of the role itself. And if you asked my mum what is a management consultant, she would have said something. She would have made a link to that movie Up in the Air. The guys that fly around the country, they spend a lot of time on planes. I think they're firing people. Not really sure. She wasn't really too clear on what the role was. And to be honest, I don't blame her. If you ask my friends what I did, they would have absolutely no clue. I tried my best to explain to them at barbecues, management consultant does this, that, and the other strategy, all these things. No, they had no clue what I was doing. They just knew I was away a lot of the week and often back on weekends. If you asked me what I did at the time, I'd tell you something inspiring about, helping to empower leaders to make better decisions based on data, all this really good stuff. But if we're honest, what I really did was spend a lot of time cramped on a plane, working in an Excel spreadsheet, building out some pretty complex models. Now, I had a lot of fun doing it, but what I found was that not only was I learned a lot from the data side of things, and I think that was certainly very inspiring. But a challenge for me, at least, was that as working as a management consultant in Australia, whenever you're asked the question, how should a company grow? How can we reach new markets? How can we, push to the next frontier? The answer was almost always, what's going on in the United States? Let's just work that out, and then we can capture those best elements and apply them back in Australia. That got really old. As someone who's excited about technology and wanted to understand what the forefront looked like, I got sick of the answer being, let's look at what's happening in the US. And so I figured the best answer would be for me to pack up shop and actually move to the United States. So if we rewind back to 2017, I made the move and ended up starting first at a company called MuleSoft based in San Francisco, which was since been acquired by Salesforce. And that's where I started working in this value engineering or value acceleration kind of work. I worked there essentially helping to solve the problem of helping our sales teams to sell a really technical product by uncovering this story of the value that our software delivered to them. It was a great experience, managed to learn a whole heap. And more recently, I made the shift still within the US, but moving across to Databricks in order to continue down this path of value engineering or value acceleration, but with Databricks instead. So now that's brought me to Databricks. So Databricks, as Jungwook mentioned, has recently had a really healthy valuation at about 28 billion. which is not too bad for a company that's only 7 years old. We now have just over 5,000 customers. There are some really seminal technologies that have come from Databricks, not from myself, from some of the other really clever people who are actually able to do the engineering work. But a few really interesting open source projects have actually come from Databricks. You may have heard of Spark. Delta Lake is another big piece, and this ML Flow, machine learning flow, are 3 really seminal technologies that we've championed and really partnered with the open source community to develop. Databricks itself calls itself the data and AI company. So that can be really, really broad. What I'd like to do is actually talk through in a little detail, what is the problem that Databricks solves? And maybe that'll put in context a little bit, because before I got to Databricks, when I thought of data and AI, everyone I asked had a different definition of it. They had a different understanding of where companies fit within that mix, what companies were capable of. And so let's do a little bit of a level set and describe Databricks' view of the world. So this I'm going to leave on the page on the screen for a little while, so you get a chance to absorb it. This is a view of the evolution of the way that data teams have thought about data over the course of a couple of decades. The piece that's probably most familiar is the one on the left. On the left, we have the data warehouse. So if you've worked with Tableau, if you've worked with Snowflake, if you've worked with Redshift, you might have some of those solutions might be familiar, or an Oracle enterprise data warehouse. That is the way that data has traditionally been structured. We would take very structured data from a variety of systems. We do some processing on it, which is the ETL step. And then that data would be accessible through these data marts, whether it's a BI dashboard, whether it's through reporting, whether it's an Excel spreadsheet that ends up pulling from those systems, so we can pull through the data. The data warehouse has been around as for ages. That's kind of our starting point. Now, that's been very effective and very useful when we have structured data, operational data, and it's in a format that's reasonably recognizable, that we can readily use. Unfortunately, data warehouses cannot do some of the more advanced analytics that we're now starting to turn to. A data warehouse isn't great at unstructured data. So when I think about sound files, when I think about huge volumes of telemetry data, so clicks that you might have been making through a website, that is much better suited to a data lake. And a data scientist, that's the world that they'd be operating in. Here we see a bit of a different process. We see data coming from a variety of sources. It can be structured or it can be unstructured. It still goes through that ETL process and ends up in a data mart. It can still go to reports and BI, but now critically, it can actually be done. You can actually go down this path on the left, which points you towards data science and machine learning. So a data lake, up until recently, actually used to live entirely separately from a data warehouse. So you'd actually have these 2 competing architectures. You'd have 2 different sources of truth. You'd have, for example, in tangible terms, you might have a CEO who's pulling in a report on, sales for their organization from a data warehouse source, and a data scientist that's actually doing some really interesting predictive analytics on a completely different data source. And the two may not reconcile. And so you can imagine that's a pretty significant challenge for an organization for any organization where the information that you have needs to be accurate and needs to be applicable to multiple different business applications. So the solution that Databricks puts forward is what we have here on the right, which is what we're calling a lakehouse. And so this is the combination of a data warehouse and a data lake all in one place. And so when we think about those technologies like Spark under the hood, when we talk about ML Flow, all of those are built into this lakehouse paradigm. And Databricks' platform, the software that we provide, essentially enables an organization to work in this way. And so if we think about that same challenge from before, a CEO that wants access to sales information on a timely basis, and a data scientist who wants to be able to predict what sales are likely to be for a given period, in the lakehouse paradigm, they'll be able to use the same data sources and the same structure to serve both of those purposes. And so now that means that we don't have duplication. So we don't have issues with data quality. We don't have issues with lower performance. All of these things end up flowing through to what ends up being a much more performant data team, and able to move faster and produce insights at a much faster clip. Now let me stop there. I know there's a lot of pieces on the page. Any kind of thoughts, reactions, clarifications from this piece? Any thoughts as it relates to the lakehouse?
One of the interesting points is compared with the data lake and the lake house.
Mm-hmm.
data lake is more close to the traditionally extract like the ETL process, and then but then the lake house it just remove the ETL process and it just replace the procedure with data prepare validation everything, and then it's I can do at the same time BI or streaming analysis or data science or machine learning at the same time with the whole the data, the deposit or repository. Is it right?
I see what you're doing there. You're kind of comparing the two on the left to the lakehouse picture on the right to work out the differences. And I think you've rightfully spotted the ETL piece we've kind of removed from the right piece, from the lakehouse architecture. I think that the best way to describe the differences might be to give you an example. So one of our Databricks' biggest competitors, you may have heard of them, is Snowflake. And one thing that we often see when going head to head with Snowflake is that there are large volumes of data that are being processed in an organization. They'll actually do that processing in Snowflake. They'll do ETL work in Snowflake. And their product is really good for smaller volumes of data. But once you get to huge scale, then it becomes very, very expensive to do that ETL work with Snowflake in the data warehouse. Now with Databricks, it doesn't matter if you're doing that kind of data processing, the ETL work in a data warehouse or a data lake. All of it ends up using the best fit for purpose engine to do that processing. And so that's why we abstract away the ETL piece. From the user's perspective, they don't really need to think about it. All they know is that the data is being processed by Databricks, and it ends up being a lower cost for them to do that task. So yeah, really good call out. You're right, it's missing from the right piece. And the reason is we kind of abstract away that level of complexity and deliver it in the most performant way.
Kevin, one more question.
Yeah.
For Lakehouse, do you try to say this is like a unified platform, right? That can do data analysis, data science, everything all together.
Yes, the messaging is certainly that Databricks is a unified platform that delivers across those different personas. What I'm referring to here is more the architecture side of it. So Databricks is the provider of a lakehouse platform. So when we say this is the way that we're headed towards the future, our platform, our software solution maps really, really nicely to it. And it's certainly unified. Whether you're a data scientist that wants to tap into the information to do some predictive modeling, or you're a business analyst that wants to generate a historical report, you'll use that one same platform to do both of those tasks. Definitely. Any other thoughts on this one?
Are there different, I understand this is a platform, but are there different tools from different vendors you integrate with, or you have a single solution for stream analysis and machine learning and all of those modules? What do you have here?
Yeah, it's this slide is certainly an oversimplification. If we look at what's actually going on in the real world, customers will want to use, they may want to use, say, Snowflake for business intelligence. They may want to use H2O for their machine learning pipelines. There are actually a lot of different products that would plug into an architecture to deliver on various needs. Databricks' answer is we have a set of products that cover the vast majority of those data needs, but we're also very much an open platform. And that's really critical to data team leaders who want the flexibility to plug in some of their existing cloud-based software to deliver on some of those specific use cases. So yeah, in short, Databricks offers a lot of those solutions, but is also compatible with other solutions that are out there, whether it's through connectors or direct integrations.
Thank you.
No worries. All fantastic questions. Let me press on and kind of jump to the next piece. So I think we talked about this combination, the data lake and the data warehouse comes together to form the lakehouse. I find it often solidifies most clearly when we think about a real customer example. And so the example I wanted to walk you through here is with Disney Plus. So I think I'd imagine most of us here are familiar with Disney Plus's services that have gone absolutely gangbusters during COVID. Whether you're you're watching the Mandalorian or you're pushing through with your kids and watching a whole heap of fantastic content that they've got available. If you've watched the Disney Plus's growth, you will have seen that they have managed to get to a huge number of subscribers incredibly quickly. And the thing that you might not be aware of is that some very significant portions, the way that Disney Plus operates is built on Databricks. So specifically, when you think about your experience as a user in the platform, you've watched a piece of content, you just watched the latest episode of The Mandalorian, you'll get recommendations as to what the platform would suggest that you watch next. That, of course, is all based on huge volumes of user data. Their goal is to keep you engaged with the platform. Databricks is the engine that does that data processing to kind of pull together those recommendations and then present them to a given user. Now, that's a kind of very tangible element, so you can understand that all of that user data needs to be aggregated. There's a data scientist that then manipulates that data in order to pull forward the recommendation. There are other pieces that actually sit on Databricks too, which are really interesting. For example, Disney Plus has experimented with some different trial periods to a lot of the other streaming services. Traditionally with Netflix, you end up with a longer trial period, and then you'll have to switch over to paid. Disney ended up going for much shorter and then eliminating the free trial period. They were actually able to do large-scale experiments based on the Databricks platform and very quickly work out what is the trade-off of making decisions like that. Is it actually worthwhile? Yeah, you'll have fewer conversions if fewer people subscribe if you go for paid right from the beginning. But is that worthwhile given the lifetime value of that customer? That modeling is all performed within Databricks, and so it empowers the leaders of the business to make decisions based on that information. Now, what this has meant is that as they have had incredible growth and as they've rolled out globally, the infrastructure that they have needed has been able to scale very, very efficiently with Databricks in the cloud. So now as they push forward in India, as they push forward in these global markets, the Databricks platform has enabled them to scale. I find this is a nice kind of helpful, tangible point there. Basically to kind of demonstrate what all of this means. When I say a lakehouse, what this means is a business decision maker is able to understand subscriber numbers within a given region, and a data scientist is able to plug into that same data and build out a recommendation engine to work out what content we should be touching next. Both of those are touching the same data sources through Databricks because of that lakehouse paradigm. Any thoughts or questions on that one?
So it's more simply summarize your presentation is a lakehouse is an engine for the data scientist, and it's one of the example is target marketing, like when you go to the Amazon or when you go to the Amazon, there are lots of advertising or something related to product. It comes together, something like that. In the Disney Plus, if you watch some certain type of the video or a movie, then they are offering something similar to somebody watching this movie also watching this movie, so you might like it, right?
I think that's it. I think you're hitting the nail on the head. I think the tweak I'd have there is that it's not always purely marketing focused. This is, I think, one good example, a nice tangible one that we can all relate to. If I think about the interesting thing with Databricks is that it's essentially the breadth of how you can apply these machine learning technologies. Yes, for Disney with their marketing side, we can similarly translate this to John Deere and the large heavy machinery that they push through globally. They actually have telemetry data that's pulled off each of those different combine harvesters that is fed into a data lake, which can help to proactively identify when a piece of machinery is likely to fail. And so again, that's a different application of the machine learning model, which is all kind of which is essentially supported by Databricks. Yeah, huge breadth, which is very exciting.
Thank you.
No worries at all. So what I'd love to jump to next is when we think about this value part of the equation. I've gone reasonably technical right out the gate there, talking about lakehouse, talking about architectures, and kind of diving into the needs of data teams. What I'd like to do next is transition into the value story that we can build out with a given customer. Before I do, any other questions on Databricks more broadly, or anything I can clarify before we kind of talk about how we end up selling on value and touching on this next piece?
I had a quick one.
Yeah.
So from my understanding, the Databricks platform, it essentially is a repository for all the data, and depending on users' needs, allows them different kind of interfaces, whether it's kind of the needs of a data warehouse or the needs of a data lake, correct?
Yes, I think that's a good way to summarize it. I'll jump ahead a little bit and give you a bit of imagery around what the components are. What you were describing there, I think, is a really helpful lens to put on this, like who is actually consuming the data. So we certainly support multiple different personas. We talked a bit about the data scientists. So we've got those here on the right. We talked a little bit about the business intelligence needs, so that reporting need, all of that's served here as well. Data engineers are doing a lot of the transformation work. They use Databricks directly. And then they're actually, system to system communications, which can be done through Databricks too. Now, the one point I would correct from your perspective, Christian, is that the data lives in Databricks, but there's actually a really important distinction for customers. The data itself sits in whichever cloud they've chosen to store it in. So if they're a customer of AWS, their data can sit in S3 storage. If they're an Azure customer or a Google Cloud customer, that data can be sitting in Azure Blob Storage. It's essentially living within the public cloud of one of those large players. Databricks serves as almost like an abstraction layer that sits across the top. We help to provide that management and governance, and then serve the information up to serve those different use cases. And what that means is customers have great flexibility to actually switch where that data lives if their needs change in future. As well as the ability to serve each of those different kind of user personas that we have listed across the top. Okay,
so essentially through API integration or some kind of integration, like you said, you guys sit on top of the data and allow for different kind of visualizations of the data.
Exactly. If we get into super tangible terms, the way that a user interacts with Databricks is they see a data science notebook. They will see a notebook with, or a series of notebooks with like a folder structure, and they'll be able to code and query that data, or they'll be able to generate, business intelligence reports based on that data. If you're an engineer, you'll actually be able to write the integrations to pipe the data in. And so it's a web interface. It's certainly in the cloud. That's essentially what it looks like, and it's able to deliver on all these exciting things that we're talking about here.
Cool. Thanks.
Perfect. No, great clarification. Thank you for jumping in. So let's switch gears into the. Oh,
sorry, I have a related question.
Yes, sure, please.
You're already on that slide. How do you help pull the requirements out? Because we're undertaking an analytics project at my work, and I think our executives struggle with articulating requirements in a digestible way, and I think there's some difficulty knowing what's possible. So can you talk about how you actually get people to give you requirements so that you can produce what they need when they don't really understand what they need or what's possible?
That's a fantastic question. I'm actually thinking that the next couple of slides that I'll share talk to what your kind of answered parts of your question. Could we put a pin in it and then revisit it once I've walked through these next couple of pieces? Because I think the important thing here is to actually understand the personas that are at play and understand why they find it challenging to articulate the requirements. Once we have that foundation, let's jump back to it, because I think that's a really good question. I love it. So let me power through just a couple of slides. So if we think about the value that data and AI can deliver, I think I'm sure as you study your MBA, you'll see millions of kind of data points like this. We know that the opportunity with data science and AI is massive. Whether it's a McKinsey, BCG, there's a whole heap of numbers out there that are just mind blowing. This is the future. The data points that I find most interesting are, yes, it's huge, but a lot of these projects actually fail. So Gartner called out that 85% of big data projects fail. 87% of these data science projects never make it into production. So you can imagine that there's this huge promise of what data and AI can deliver, but it doesn't actually, the potential is often not realized. And that can be really expensive, essentially we're early in the adoption cycle of what the potential is here. And so I find it helpful to think through the personas that are at play and understand what we're actually dealing with. So if we kind of rewind to actually maybe we don't have to rewind. You're probably going to MBA parties these days, but back in the day, at least when I was studying, the math geek was not so popular at a party. No one wanted to be the math geek. That was the nerd. These days, data scientists are becoming the hot new thing in such high demand, being paid incredible amounts to solve really tough problems in a business setting. Now, while that skill is certainly very much in demand, that same persona finds it very difficult to articulate the value of what they're doing outside of their particular domain. So this piece, this illustration, I find sums up my job beautifully. When I work with the head of engineering or head of data science, and I talk to them about the kind of problems that they're solving, they can talk for days on end about the standard mean error and the intricacies of the data that they're dealing with. But when I ask them questions like, what is the impact of this on the business? Who is going to be making, who can make a decision based on this information? Who is the downstream team that's impacted? How does this change your customer's perspective? When I ask that question, they're often like a deer in the headlights. They're unable to make the link between the technical problem that they're solving and the broader impact that has on the business. And so it's very important for us to serve as a translator from that technical problem through to the business problem. Now, the thing that I find really interesting here is that in practice, if I think about the largest enterprises in the States that we have the opportunity to work with, they have made huge investments in these data teams. They've hired the top shelf head of data science with a really powerful PhD driven team underneath them that are getting paid top dollar. So they almost feel as though there's an implicit assumption that, of course, what I'm doing is valuable. But there is, I'll tell you time and time again, I see there's a disconnect, and it's difficult for us to translate and actually describe the work that this data team is doing in words that a business leader can understand. So again, to look at it a little differently, there's a great Harvard Business Review article. If we're recording it, I'd encourage you to go in and have a look. This article actually explores why these data projects fail. What's missing? What's going on? And it really links through to that whole deer in the headlights problem that I laid out earlier. Successful teams, they have a deep understanding of the business problem that they're trying to solve. They unite those different personas between the business side and the technology teams. They've built trust among the decision makers by making it a palatable, understandable problem that's being solved, and they can explain it. Now, the ones that fail, they're the ones that did not connect with the business executives. They're the ones that assumed that, of course, what I'm doing is valuable. I'm a really important data scientist doing some important stuff. Everyone should just understand that. There's certainly a disconnect. And then secondly, the success and value for the ones that have failed is expressed in technical terms. Here was the standard error of the particular problem I was solving. That doesn't mean anything to the general manager of a business unit. Instead, we need to understand if you're reducing the number of returns we have, with an online retailer, here is the value that actually delivers in dollar terms to a business over a given period of time. To hammer the point home just a little bit further, I'll leave again this up on the screen for a few moments, but what I find interesting here is that no matter whether it's a data project or it's a capital investment or it's a any business decision that's being made in an organization, the investment itself needs to align with the priorities of the company, and it needs to, if it doesn't, it'll get tossed out, as this particular CFO described. And then we need to consider, what is the return? What is the net present value, the return on our investment? The one that will generate the greatest return is the one that wins. Now, that is a critical skill that is often missing within these data teams that we certainly help with. Now, let me stop there. Does this make sense in terms of the kind of personas that we're working with and that challenge in articulating the business value?
Yeah, I have a question about perhaps the liaison between the technical and engineers and the business. How much like technical knowledge do you have to have in order to be able to be the translator?
Coming into Databricks, my level of understanding, as I mentioned, I was the nerd on a plane cramped with my laptop with my head in a spreadsheet. I'm able to understand data at a spreadsheet level, but any code leading to a machine learning model, it goes completely over my head. What I am able to understand is the essentially the line of questioning to uncover the so what. And that's what a business leader needs. That's the kind of skill that we need to do that translation. If we can, run that discovery process in order to uncover the why, that's what we need. I'd say there's a basic level of understanding that's required of the technologies that are at play, but essentially, I wouldn't place as much emphasis as you might think on understanding the ins and outs of what Spark technology is versus the other ways that you might be able to manipulate data. It's a long way of saying the why or the so what matters a lot more than the technology itself.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Not a problem. It's a common thing that we encounter, especially as our team grows, the business value team at Databricks. We look for diversity. We look for people that are able to uncover business value from a reasonably technical background, but often there are less technical people that are really adept at this skill, and they often use the fact that they often use it to their advantage, that they actually don't understand the nuances. You can direct the conversation back to the business if you can't talk about the nuances of Spark.
Gavin, in addition to that, when you, in your MBA journey, did you take any data analysis course or any course that cover data analysis?
My MBA journey consisted of, I lived in Singapore and one of my friends was doing their MBA at INSEAD, and so I went to some of their parties. I haven't done an MBA. I've done the socializing side of an MBA, but I did study I did a business undergraduate degree with an extra postgrad section where I was studying and focused a little more on analytics. I found that grounding was very helpful, and I coupled that with the kind of practical experience in management consulting of building out larger scale financial models. I found that was a really helpful grounding for me. If I think about the background of other value consultants that work at Databricks and others I've worked with at previous companies, they often have either a consulting background, an MBA background, or a kind of finance background in order to push into this space. But it's often, there's a critical piece here around the ability to sell and uncover the why and kind of interact with customers, as opposed to just the kind of technical grounding. It's kind of both.
Cool, thanks.
No worries. I would love to come back and do the actual study side of an MBA rather than just the drinking at some point. So when we think about overcoming these challenges, there are essentially 3 steps for us. There are 3 ways elements of this process that we go through in order to uncover this value story and uncover the why and the so what. So the first piece is aligning the data projects to strategic priorities. Now, this might seem super obvious, but Gia, I know your question earlier was around kind of firming up those requirements. I would say the most common trap that a new salesperson at Databricks can fall into is what we call a science project. We will come across a customer who's really excited about Databricks. They might have heard about the big valuation. They might have heard about Disney Plus and the great work we're doing there. And all they really want to do, because they're a data nerd that loves getting their hands dirty, they want to spin up the Databricks platform and they want to explore some data. They want to play with it and they want to push through with this science experiment to indulge their curiosity. That's absolutely fine. There are ways they can do that in a self-service fashion. But if they're to be a successful customer of Databricks, they instead need to, we need to work out what they are doing for their organization and how Databricks can help them accelerate on that path. So we need to align whatever they're doing to the strategic priorities of the company. So if we go back to our Disney Plus example, if there's a data scientist that's come to us saying they want to be able to solve a problem of huge streaming large volumes of data in order to build a recommendation engine, the first line of questioning for us is to understand what problem does this recommendation engine solve? How does that actually help Disney with its core objectives? What are Disney's core objectives? Okay, you're looking for growth in your platform. You're looking for better engagement among your users. If we can uncover and plot that link between the use case itself, what the team is doing, and the priorities of the company, then we can be sure it's actually something that's a worthwhile investment of time on both parties' sides. So that's the first critical piece. What is what is the impact of what we're doing to the business overall? Once we've identified that and made that link, the second piece is for us to analyze and then actually measure the business impact. So we want to understand, for Disney, for example, If we know that Databricks is able to accelerate their growth journey, then we want to actually be able to understand what would this have looked like without Databricks, with the next best alternative, with open source tools that you might have cobbled together, versus the path that you've chosen with Databricks. So we can, we can quantify that, and I'll show you what that looks like shortly. And then the third piece, and I'd say that this is absolutely critical and far too often missed, unfortunately, is telling the story. And so if I think of what this looks like in the best case scenario, Databricks as a software technology provider will work with a champion, a head of data science, a head of data engineering at an organization. And together we will build a story and then communicate that to executive leadership at the company in order to drive a real case for change. It's not just Databricks' voice, it's not just the customer's voice, it's a united voice, which is really anchored in the value of the work that's being done. Those are the kind of three critical elements that we pull together. Now, let me give you just a couple of examples, and then we'll pause once again. The one challenge that I see, and I'll leave this on the page so you have a second to absorb. The most common story, when I talk about the story, the most common story I would see among reps, honestly, at Databricks when I first started, was aligned with this. So first, with the story that a rep would put forward when they're looking for an investment in Databricks, when they're chasing a deal, they would say to a customer, number one, usage is up. You've been using Databricks, your usage has increased, you were spending $20,000 per month previously, now you're spending $50,000. Isn't that fantastic? Usage is up. Slide number two, if we look towards the future, you're probably going to use even more Databricks, but you're using even more growth. We're expecting even more growth. I'm going to delete that bit. Third part, in order to purchase that extra capacity that you need to meet your needs, really easy. We'll make it easy for you to make that purchase. Number four, there are three options. Here's how much it's going to cost you. And five, by the way, we're going to train you so that you can actually take advantage of this capacity that you're buying with Databricks. What's wrong with that story? You're welcome to cheat. I did have it on the slide earlier and I pressed delete. Does anything not ring true when we look at that? I mean, if we think about some of the other concepts that we've been talking through, are there any things that are missing from that story?
Like the successes of the company, like are they using it for something that's beneficial to them?
100%. You've hit the nail on the head. The big thing that's missing is anything that's customer centric. Where is the story of the success? If I look at our usage is growing slide, that slide says is Databricks centric. Databricks is doing well. You're using more of our product. The customer doesn't care about that. The customer cares about, have they delivered a recommendation engine at scale that is growing because more users are using it, which is actually delivering an outcome for the business which matters, which is better engagement, better user growth, that kind of thing. That's exactly the piece that's missing. This is a Databricks-centric view of the world, whereas it should be customer-centric by telling the story of the value that we deliver. Love it, you nailed it. So this is what the alternative looks like. So when my team works with our sales teams and with customers, this is the flow that we build. The first piece, the place that we start, is the business objectives. What are you trying to do? Why does this matter? And then when we talk about the business objectives, we thread the use cases into those. So you've got a recommendation engine, you've got we've got a cross-sell upsell initiative. Not only are we going to say what those initiatives are, we're going to map them back to the priorities that you have so that you can see that the things that this data team is doing matter to the top levels of this organization. The next piece is the challenges and solution. So again, earlier we talked about gathering requirements. We'll talk through the challenges a customer faces with their current environment and how Databricks can help to overcome it. The third piece is, what is all of this worth? What is the value that our platform delivers? What is that, either as a forecast or a backward-looking view in the case with our Disney example? And then finally, what is our success plan? How are we going to help you get from where you are now to that future that we see together, which is going to be unlocking so much value? And of course, as you can imagine, there's a sticker price on the end of it that they'll pay Databricks in order to unlock all of this. So I hope you can see there's a huge difference if we flick between the two. Previously, we were talking about usage, we were talking about growth, we were talking about how you purchase, we gave options and talked about training. In this alternate state, we've built a story around value. It's centered around the value to the customer, and then we've overlaid our technology and how it helps them overcome those problems. I'm hoping you can see there's a bit of a difference there. Any kind of thoughts and reactions to the way we've laid it out?
Mr. Edgley, so.
Nope, I think you've put yourself on mute. Right after you called me Mr. Edgley, I was listening intently. I don't often get called Mr. Edgley.
Okay, Mr. Edgley. So you're talking about the story is like a customer bill. So okay, I pay like the $10,000 a year, Databricks. But then what will I get? So how much are you gonna helping to grow my business, and how it's impact? Is it right?
That's the story we're trying to deliver. And I think the challenge here is a data scientist is fantastic at actually doing the execution work. They can pull in this data. I mean, from my perspective, at least, and I think from yours too, that might seem like a monumental task to actually pull in all that information, turn it into something useful and produce a use case. That's an incredible skill that they have. But that data science leader often doesn't have the skill of being able to communicate to an executive audience why this matters and tell it in a way that is actually going to justify that investment. If a data scientist were to come to a CFO and say, I want, probably for $10,000, it's not really going to be much of an issue, but if it's $500,000 that they want to invest in technology, this is the story that the CFO needs to see in order to work out whether that's a worthwhile investment or not. And so it's really important for our team and for Databricks, and I imagine for any organization that is making a large investment like this, technology or otherwise, to build out this value story in order to essentially arm those leaders with what they need to make a decision.
Hey, Gavin, really quickly.
Yeah.
Is this plan under the assumption that a company has someone who is familiar with, formulating data, or maybe a data scientist on the team? And if they don't have someone that can do that, but they know what their objectives are and what their current challenges or situation is, how does Databricks approach that?
Yeah, it's a great point. What you're really referring to there is what Databricks we would call a company's data and AI maturity. So if I think of the most mature companies, Disney, they're a data company at its core, and they're able to use their data to great effect. And they have large teams of data scientists and engineers that help them realize that vision. So selling to them is certainly a different animal to, I can think of a couple of examples working with some national retailers here in the US. They may only have analysts. They might have analysts that can use a data warehouse, but certainly not engineers or data scientists that can do some of these more advanced skills. And it's often difficult for those kind of companies to access that talent because it's in high demand. And places like Databricks, Apple, Uber and Lyft, they end up consuming a lot of that talent from the market. So it's a very different motion. If we're dealing with one of those companies that is earlier on their maturity journey, that has a smaller scale, less access to that talent, we would often be selling to a business leader in that scenario who would need to be making the case to actually attract that talent in the first place. Now, if I think about where the industry is as a whole right now, Databricks is still selling to the organizations that have already taken the first step. They've likely already invested in the data team. They've got a handful of these people that can actually do the work. Or alternately, they've got the leadership in place that knows that this is important, and they are looking to external partners, consulting partners to actually deliver on the use cases. So I think in answer to your question, Databricks has a bit of self-selection bias. We're only dealing with companies that already have some of these people to do the work. And if they don't have it, they're likely already kind of investing or finding other workarounds in order to get the people on board that can do this.
Well, thank you.
No worries. Perfect. All right, if there aren't any more thoughts on this one, I'd love to share just a couple of other pieces around how Databricks actually delivers value. I know we've talked about this with a couple of different perspectives. I know there was a question earlier around how we gather requirements and then actually convert it into a value story. I'd like to revisit that and make sure we've answered that question. But before we do, I'd like to leave us leave this slide up for a few moments. This is my favorite slide. So if a new person at Databricks is starting and they're like, you know what, Gavin, value-based selling sounds fantastic. I have no idea where to start. Or if I'm working with a customer that I haven't worked with before, this is again where I will start. And this is the way that I kind of frame the value of Databricks. So the way I explain it is that the value of the Databricks platform fits into three broad categories. Essentially, there's an infrastructure benefit at the very bottom. There's a productivity benefit to your data teams. They'll be able to do more with less. And then there's this top piece right across the top, which is the business impacting use cases. So this is what your business will be able to do with Databricks that you couldn't do before. What you, will now be able to do faster or at lower risk. Now, if I'm working with so what I'll do is I'll kind of walk us through each of those steps. The infrastructure piece, what I'm referring to there is, we know that Databricks is a really performant, cost-effective way for you to process large volumes of data. We can quantify the value of Databricks as it relates to the infrastructure by comparing the cost of you to do your work that you do today with Databricks versus whatever solution you're using at present. So comparing those two and finding the difference is the value that Databricks delivers in that infrastructure piece. Great, easy to quantify. For the productivity side, we can work out how many people you have in your data team. If you have 5 data engineers and 5 data scientists, we know from working with other customers how much uplift you can get from those people if they're using our unified platform versus using X other alternative. Again, the difference between the two is the value that Databricks delivers. On this top piece, the sky's the limit. There's a huge breadth of things that Databricks can do, whether it's, again, I'll jump back to Disney, whether it's better engagement with your viewers, which then drives increased revenue, or it may be the John Deere example where we are proactively identifying the issues with a lot of their heavy manufacturing equipment. We can quantify that top piece too. Now, working with a data scientist or a data engineer, after walking them through that framework, I'll usually stop and ask, that's the way that we think about the value of Databricks. How does that relate to the way that you think about the value of Databricks and how we can help you? And just stop. What I'll end up hearing back is often very telling. If we're working with a data engineer or a data scientist that has their blinkers on, that can only really talk about their world, they'll basically say to me that number 1 and 2, the bottom 2 parts of that framework, are all that matters. That's all they end up focusing on. And that means that tells me as a member of the value team at Databricks that I'm going to have some work to do if I'm going to convince them that this top piece is worth them investing in. And it means that it's going to be even more difficult to bridge the gap between the data team's impact and the impact on the business. But that's not always the case. A lot of the really successful teams that I speak with, when I throw up this framework, they say, yep, that's brilliant. Let's talk about number 3. We have a list of things that we're doing that are very exciting. They impact the business. We can kind of articulate that, and they'll end up talking a lot more at that top level. And so I find when I'm as a method, as a way to actually understand the needs of these teams and to help to bridge that gap, this is a really helpful tool to put all of that in context. Any thoughts or questions on this one?
So do Databricks have expertise or domain experts in your teams who can really understand the business and come up with solutions for the clients? Or do you partner with others in the industry?
Yeah, we do. We definitely have those people within Databricks. If we talk about the structure for a moment, the challenge is the top part is really broad. If you're speaking to Disney and helping them, that's one thing. If you're speaking to Walmart and trying to help their retail or their online business, that's completely different. And so we actually have experts that are aligned to each of those verticals, and then they can translate our technology into the specific terms for that industry. Financial services is another really interesting one. Their needs are completely different to a lot of others. And so we find that specialization is important. Now the specialization changes a little bit. Often people just want to get started with Databricks. And so we actually provide them with a way to do that really quickly. And that comes from those experts. Again, if I were an MBA student looking at something like Databricks, one distinction that that is helpful to understand is that Databricks is very much a software company. Our goal is to sell this scalable platform and to work with customers to make them successful, but we're not a consulting organization. We don't want to have thousands and thousands of people actually doing this work. We're relying on a broader ecosystem to help those customers be successful. And so, yeah, we have some people that help to do it, to get them started, but we very much rely on others to do a lot of that implementation work. So we can focus on this core piece, which is developing this brilliant platform and then helping our customers to be successful with it.
Okay. Thank you.
No worries. Any other thoughts on this one? I know this is, I know we've kind of got progressively deeper. We started super high level at the industry. We got through, we've gotten to the point now where you understand a little window into what my day-to-day looks like. I appreciate we may have gone too deep for some, and that's, I think, okay. But I wanted to give you a bit of a sense for what this whole journey looks like in practice when you're actually helping customers to develop a value story and uncover it together. Beautiful. Let's progress through then. So the last piece I wanted to cover is a couple of use cases. I think we've touched on this piece. Let me do this. So there's this piece of imagery I find really helpful. Value seems so obvious. The value of something like the Disney use case is super clear. The value of other things that these teams do seem like they're super clear, but it's often in practice, it's almost like the elephant in the room. If value was so clear and so well articulated and so clearly communicated, why is it so often missing? And so I find that the real emphasis here that I would place is on the importance of actually building out this story together and making it super clear, drawing those conclusions with a customer and making it easy to tell a value story. I hope we've given you an opportunity to see what that actually looks like in practice. As a bit of a summary, we've talked on 3 points. So if we rewind back to the very beginning, we talked about the lakehouse. So we talked about the data warehouse paradigm. We talked about the data lake. We talked about how BI and data science are well suited to each of those, and how Databricks' vision for the future is this lakehouse, which combines the two, which solves some really interesting problems for data teams with the unified platform, as John Wook called out. The second piece was that really successful leaders of data teams can tell this story based on the value that they're delivering. And unsuccessful ones are probably not actually bringing people on that journey with them. And then finally, yeah, telling that story, actually building it out and then convincing others of its impact is really, really critical. And so as you kind of move forth in your current roles and as you kind of move on from after your MBAs, I'd love for you to keep this in mind as you're thinking about the impact that data teams can make. Now I know we've got a handful of minutes left, so I'm happy to answer any questions. That was the content that I wanted to share, but let me open it up. If there are any other questions, I'm happy to hang around and answer them.
I have a quick question about your data scientist perspective about the electricity usage in the future. Everybody know the EV car is a next generation business and autonomous driving. At the same time, this country needed to generate more electricity to cover the EV car and everything. So as like that, this kind of the engine, how you can recommend it to the electricity company to how to prepare it, this kind of impact.
So just so I understand, the question there is, electricity demands are increasing. How can Databricks help to manage the problem of increased demand on an electricity network? Is that the question?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one specific problem it's interesting that Databricks can help to solve it, but I think it's kind of indicative of the fact that Databricks is a tool that actually applies right across industries. I think that one question is probably that's a good one for over drinks. There's so many elements to it. I'll give you one example. I'm working with a large upstream oil and gas company in Canada. And they're vertically integrated. So upstream from generation all the way through to the retailers that actually distribute the power itself. And the interesting thing that I find there is that Databricks, yes, is able to help them solve some really interesting problems. whether it's the exploration side, working out where to mine, all the way through to optimizing between green energy and less green energy as it actually reaches a power grid. I've seen examples right across the value chain. And to what I end up learning, whether it's there in energy or elsewhere, data is absolutely critical. And so I think the future is bright. If you kind of understand the implications here, there's a lot of potential from solutions like Databricks, but also in the data and AI space more broadly.
Thank you so much.
No worries.
Hi.
Yeah.
I have a quick question. Like in general, we have several ways to achieve a particular target. So as a student, we often face these several issues, like how should we analyze which component of the Databricks will be effective for a particular project? I just want to know, like, what would you like to suggest about this?
Just so I understand. So I'm not sure I understand actually. So you're trying to work out which business problem is worth your attention? Is that the question?
Yeah, exactly. Like we have several components in the Databricks. Like you showed us the ecosystem, you compared all the stuff. So how should we analyze like what component is better for our project? There are several ways to achieve the particular target, but sometimes it's confusing for us. And yeah.
As a student of business, I would suggest that you don't go too much deeper than this level if you're trying to work out what part of the Databricks platform is helpful. I think the really interesting thing here is to understand the business problems that a platform like this can solve. And so if you're thinking about the kind of the elements in concert of the data that's available, the teams that are available to solve those problems, and where other companies are headed, the great things that they're doing with data, Databricks can help to uncover that. I would encourage you to think of Databricks as a platform that can piece together many of those different elements. I get most passionate as a person that's less technical and more business focused. I get excited about the things you can do with this, as opposed to the nuances of the platform itself. And so that's certainly the direction that I'd suggest you focus to.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, Gavin, also in addition to that, Savita, actually, I'm gonna tell you how to do it in the class. So you will learn how to use Databricks platform.
Sure, Professor. Yeah, this is something new for us. Yeah.
Yeah. So near soon, from this week, you will learn how to use Spark.
Ooh, I didn't realize that. I'm glad to hear that you'll have the opportunity to use it. That's fantastic. I ended up doing it. I got maybe 6 months into working at Databricks, and I still hadn't done enough work hands-on with it. So once the some of the COVID-19 data became available, I ended up jumping into a notebook and essentially doing some work in Spark, a little bit of coding to uncover it. It really helped me understand exactly how the pieces fit together. So I'm hoping it's the same for the class too.
You may also take my course.
It sounds really good.
Yeah, and it's very interesting.
Good trading.
Perfect. I know we've reached time, so I'm happy to let everyone get back to their Saturdays. Jungwook, again, thanks for inviting me along to join the class. I'm happy
same here. Actually, can I ask one? I mean, like 2 questions before we wrap up?
Yeah, of course, please.
The first one is maybe easy to answer. My colleague, my faculty member asked me to ask you when IPO is going to be happening.
Oh, I'm also very curious to that.
Yeah, great question. Your guess is as good as mine. I think there's been a lot of information to the street that Databricks has it in their sights, and we've been kind of doing a lot of stuff to make it happen. I think the bit for me, at least, as someone that's working within Databricks, the IPO isn't so much an endpoint. It's just another milestone along the road. I think Databricks is really early in the growth journey for the company. There's huge potential. I'm looking forward to the IPO as a eventual sign of success, but there's so much here to do. I think that'll just be it's a step along the road.
When I read the news article, the original plan was early in the 2021. Your company should do the IPO, but this is March. So I'm also very curious. You're gonna pursuing the IPO in this year.
Who knows? I mean, yeah, it could be. Everyone at Databricks reads things like that as well, so we're all just as curious.
And second question is, you know, the Databricks integrate deep learning lately, like aggressively, and how it goes. I mean, you guys use it for real project, or you just use it as like a research or just post test?
It absolutely is used in practice. Yeah. So the deep learning piece, I'm trying to think of a good recent example that I've touched on. So I'm a little bit of a data nerd. I'm also a gaming nerd. I've done spent a fair bit of time in virtual reality during COVID. And one of the most interesting applications of the Databricks technology as it relates to that space is in improving player experience with some really interesting deep learning models. So we're working with a handful of gaming companies, both VR and kind of traditional pancake style gaming, to understand the many different factors that influence a player's experience, and then proactively provide interventions to make the experience better. So that's all based on a lot of the deep learning technology. The specific piece that I find most interesting is understanding unintentional behaviors that make other people have a rubbish experience, and then nudging other players with really targeted event-based alerts to basically push them in a different direction. So what Databricks is doing there is understanding what makes a game fun, and then providing interventions to make sure that the level of fun is increased for everyone that's involved. Again, it's not, I'm sorry I can't go into the details of exactly the deep learning application, but I know that that's under the hood what's driving the business impact there.
Cool.
Beautiful.
People, I mean, it's not really easy to have this wonderful person to be in the Zoom meeting. So anyone have any question before we wrap up?
I had one more question, actually. I was just thinking about the business value. What is the very interesting thing, actually, what they bring it? So any insight you would like to add? How do you approach business or industry and bringing that value with the data knowledge and the technology? Because it is merging the technology with the domain. That's what you can really understand the business and bring value to the table and CXO level. So anything more you have to add there, Gavin?
I mean, I agree with the way you framed it. The potential of data and AI is completely different when you look at it by industry. And so I think Databricks' success as we scale, as we chase an IPO, as we continue to grow as a company, our success will largely hinge on our ability to do that very well, to turn this Swiss Army knife of a platform into the specific implications that it has for a given industry. That's going to be a huge challenge, and I think it's something that we've laid the foundation for with a whole heap of our industry vertical expertise. But it's something we're going to need to get even better at. I would agree, it's critical.
Great, thank you.
Beautiful, my pleasure.
And two last question before we let Gavin go.
No worries. What have you got? I've got clapping hands. Does that count as a question?
Oh, maybe.
I'm happy with that.
Okay, then, Gavin, I really appreciate your talk and to introduce all like the cutting edge approach for big data world, including deep learning and everything in the business terms of view. So thanks again. Please give him really big hands.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gavin. And
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
yeah, have a great weekends and talk to you later, Gavin.
Thank you. You too.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys. And you guys, let's see you in another Zoom for the class.
Sure.
So I'm glad to see you here and see you soon in another Zoom. Thank you, guys.
Yeah,
and
thank you so much, Professor.
As well.
See you at the Monday.
Okay, take care.
Yeah, some of us from the other class.
Yeah. That was good chance for them.
Thank you for inviting.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.